In June of 2014, a family bought a house for $1.3 million. 3 days after they got the keys, they received a letter in the mail. The letter said the writer's grandfather had been watching the house in the 1920s. The writer said it was his turn. The family never moved in. The letters kept coming for 5 years, and the person who wrote them has never been found. That's not the worst house on this list. It's not even close. There are houses we're about to look at where people were kept underground for decades. Those are houses you can still drive past today. I went looking for the worst one, the most disturbed house the internet has ever obsessed over. And by the end of this video, I'm going to tell you which one wins. If you've ever watched BuzzFeed Unsolved Supernatural, you've seen this house. They've been here twice. The Sallie House is a small, white, 2-story Victorian home in Atchison, Kansas, built sometime between 1867 and 1871. It looks like 100 other houses on 100 other Midwestern streets. The story goes like this. In the early 1900s, the house belonged to a doctor named Charles Finney. The first floor was his medical practice. The second floor was where his family lived. A frantic mother showed up carrying her young daughter, Sallie. The girl had collapsed from severe abdominal pain. Finney diagnosed appendicitis. He didn't have time to wait for the anesthesia to kick in. He believed her appendix was about to burst, so he started the surgery early. Sallie woke up halfway through. She started screaming, and then she went silent. She had passed away on the operating table. Whether or not Sallie was a real person is actually disputed. There's no documented record of her passing in any medical records or local newspapers. Some historians believe the entire legend was invented by a former mayor of Atchison as a publicity stunt to bring tourists to town. Here's the problem. In 1992, a young couple, Tony and Deborah Pickman, moved into the house with their newborn son. Within months, things started happening that they could not explain. Stuffed animals would rearrange themselves on the floor. The dog would growl at empty corners of the nursery. Tony started waking up with scratches on his body. Then the scratches got worse. He found them on his stomach, his back, his face. They appeared in front of witnesses, with no one near him. A film crew once captured them on camera in real time. The Pigmans fled the house in 1994. Tony said he was experiencing blackouts. He said he was having homicidal urges.
Going through what I experienced would, to me, be similar to a soldier going through shell shock. I mean, there was one night in particular when I was up in the master bedroom trying to fall asleep when it seemed to be a reoccurring experience. I would hear scratching in the walls behind the headboard, pounding in the walls. Every time I'd close my eyes, I would hear this whispering, which sounded like 7 people at one time trying to talk to you at once. I could never make out their name. I made out a couple names that I really don't like to say.
They documented everything in a book, and the house has been lived in by no one since. The Sallie House operates as a paranormal tourism destination. You can book overnight stays, but you have to sign a liability waiver. The Atchison Chamber of Commerce manages it. Multiple paranormal shows have filmed there. Ghost Adventures featured it in 2015. BuzzFeed Unsolved went there twice, and during one of their investigations, a flashlight responded to verbal commands, turning on and off according to questions asked. Their viewers voted it the best supernatural evidence in the show's entire run. What makes the Sallie House interesting isn't whether or not you believe in ghosts. It's that almost every visitor reports the same thing. A feeling of being watched. Scratches appearing on male visitors specifically. Batteries draining instantly. And electronics malfunctioning. A lot of people probably know this one. 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, Long Island. A massive beautiful Dutch colonial with 2 distinctive quarter moon windows on the top floor. In November of 1974, the Defoe family lived there. 6 people. The parents, Ronald and Louise, their 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. The oldest was 23-year-old Ronald Defoe Jr., who everyone called Butch. On the night of November 13th, around 3 AM, Butch Defoe took a gun and walked through the house. He went room to room. He shot his parents first, in their bed. Then he walked down the hall and did the same to his 2 younger brothers, both 9 and 12, sleeping in the same room. Then his 2 sisters, 13 and 18, also in their beds. Butch later claimed he had heard voices telling him to do it. He's been in prison ever since. That's the part everyone agrees on. What happened next is where the story splits in 2. A year later, in December 1975, a family named Lutz moved into the house. They got it cheap, under $80,000, even at the time, because nobody else wanted to touch it. George and Kathy Lutz, plus 3 young kids. They lasted 28 days. The Lutzes claimed to have experienced a cascade of supernatural events. Black stains that wouldn't scrub out of the toilets and bathtubs, swarms of flies in winter, a demonic pig with red eyes appearing at a window, a hidden room behind a bookshelf they called the Red Room. Gacy claimed to have woken up levitating off the bed. They abandoned the house in January 1976, with most of their belongings still inside. They told the story to a journalist named Jay Anson, who turned it into a book, The Amityville Horror, which became one of the best-selling books of the 1970s. It was adapted into a movie in 1979 that grossed nearly $19 million at the box office, equivalent to about $500 million today. The Lutzes were almost certainly lying. Most paranormal investigators who looked at the case later concluded they made it up to get out of a mortgage they couldn't afford. The lawyer for Butch DeFeo even claimed publicly that he and the Lutzes invented the whole haunting together. But what happened to the DeFeo family was real. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue is still there. People still drive past it. The owners, there have been several since the Lutzes, have all reported one thing in common. Nothing supernatural happens, but they all complain about the same problem. People who slow their cars down. People who stop and take photos. People who sometimes try to get out and walk up to the door. The owners have changed the iconic quarter moon window specifically to make the house look less like the ones in the movies. The address has been changed. The house number has been altered, but it still doesn't help. The Amityville house is the most famous haunted house in America, and the only thing that's actually haunting it is us. This is one of the most disturbing home invasion cases in modern American history. On July 23rd of 2007, Dr. William Pettit, his wife Jennifer Hawk Pettit, and their two daughters, 17-year-old Haley and 11-year-old Michaela, were at home in Cheshire, Connecticut. They were a wealthy, well-respected family. William was an endocrinologist, Jennifer was a nurse. Haley was about to leave for college. The day before, Jennifer and Michaela had gone to a grocery store. A man named Joshua Komisarjewski saw them in the parking lot, followed them home, and came back hours later with another man, Stephen Hayes, to break in. The two men entered the house at around 3 a.m. They assaulted William Pettit, restrained him in the basement, and held the family captive for several hours. In the morning, they forced Jennifer to drive to her bank and withdraw $15,000 in cash. Jennifer managed to whisper to the bank teller that her family was being held hostage. The teller alerted police. Police set up a perimeter around the house, but did not enter. Inside, while the police were sitting outside, Hayes assaulted and then unalived Jennifer Hawk Petty. They then dosed the house in gasoline. Both girls passed away from smoke inhalation. William Petty somehow escaped through the basement door, badly injured. The two attackers were caught minutes later, fleeing the scene in the family's stolen car. Both received the highest possible sentence. The state of Connecticut later abolished that sentence, so they are now serving life in prison. The house was demolished. There was no debate about it. The town was so traumatized by what happened inside that razing it was the only acceptable option. The lot has since been turned into a memorial garden in the family's name. This one is over 100 years old, and it's still unsolved. Hinterkaifeck was a small Bavarian farmstead about an hour north of Munich. Owned by the Gruber family. Andreas Gruber, 63, ran the farm with his wife, Cecilia, 72. Their widowed daughter Victoria lived there with her two children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. They kept to themselves. Neighbors said the family was insular and a little strange. In the months leading up to the night of March 31st, 1922, weird things had been happening on the farm. Andreas Gruber told his neighbors he kept finding footprints in the snow that led from the woods to his farmhouse, but no tracks leading back. The family heard footsteps in their attic at night. When Andreas climbed up to investigate, there was never anyone there. A copy of a Munich newspaper appeared on the property, a paper that nobody in the area subscribed to, that nobody could remember buying. The previous maid had quit 6 months earlier, saying the house was haunted. A 44-year-old woman named Maria Baumgartner arrived on the afternoon of March 31st. Her sister dropped her off and stayed briefly. The sister left around dinner time. She was, almost certainly, the last person outside the family to see any of them alive. That night, sometime after dark, someone lured the 4 adults out of the barn one at a time. Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and the 7-year-old Cecilia. Each of them was struck with a mattock, a heavy farming tool, like a pickaxe. This is where it gets worse. The attacker didn't leave for 3 days. They stayed at Hinterkaifeck. They ate the family's food. They fed the animals. They lit fires in the fireplace. Smoke came out of the chimney. Neighbors saw it and assumed nothing was wrong. The attacker slept somewhere on the property, possibly in the same house as the bodies. On April 4th, 4 days later, neighbors finally went to check on the farm because the family hadn't shown up to church. They found the bodies in the barn. The family dog was still alive. The attacker was gone. The case has been investigated by German police for over 100 years. They've identified dozens of potential suspects. None of them have ever been charged. Some theories suggest a former lover of Victoria's, some suggest a wandering criminal, some suggest a neighbor. The most disturbing theory is that whoever did this had been living on the property for months, hiding in the attic before that night. The footsteps, the missing keys, the newspaper, the maid who quit. It all suggests someone was already there, watching, waiting for the right moment to act. The farm was demolished about a year later. The land has been empty ever since. Today, there's a small stone memorial where the house used to stand. A century later, Hinterkaifeck is still considered Germany's most famous unsolved case. And it remains, by some distance, one of the most unsettling stories of the entire 20th century. This one isn't from the internet age, and it remains one of the most genuinely horrifying houses in American history. In 1832, a wealthy New Orleans socialite named Madame LaLaurie moved into a brand new 3-story mansion at 1140 Royal Street, in the heart of the French Quarter. She was, on the surface, the model of upper-class refinement. She hosted famous parties. She moved in the highest social circles. She was known for her charm behind closed doors. She was a sadist. Madame LaLaurie owned a number of enslaved people, and over the course of the early 1830s, rumors began to circulate that she was treating them with extraordinary cruelty. There had already been a previous investigation, in 1828, where she had been forced to sell several enslaved people because of how badly they were being treated. She had her relatives quietly buy them back and snuck them back into the house. In 1833, neighbors witnessed her chasing a young enslaved girl across the rooftop with a whip. The girl fell off the roof and passed away. She was fined and forced to sell more of her people. Once again, she had her relatives buy them back. What was actually happening inside that house didn't become public until April 10th, 1834. That's when a fire broke out in the kitchen. When the fire department arrived, they found a 70-year-old woman chained to the stove. She told them, calmly, that she had set the fire on purpose, as an attempt to end her own suffering. She said she could no longer endure what was happening upstairs. She led them to the attic. What the firefighters found in the upstairs rooms revealed severe abuse and neglect that shocked the city, and later became one of the most widely discussed cases of cruelty in early American history. 7 people were discovered restrained in inhumane conditions. Some showed signs of prolonged confinement and serious untreated injuries. Contemporary newspaper accounts and witness reports described evidence of extreme mistreatment and medical neglect. When rescue workers brought the survivors outside, news spread quickly through New Orleans. Within hours, a crowd of thousands gathered outside the mansion in outrage. Delphine LaLaurie and her husband escaped through a back exit, boarded a carriage, and fled toward Lake Pontchartrain, before eventually leaving for Paris. The mob ransacked the house. They tore the interior apart. The original mansion was largely destroyed. The current building at 1140 Royal Street is technically a different structure, rebuilt in the 1830s and 40s. On the same foundation, it's been owned by various people over the years, including, briefly, Nicolas Cage. It's still privately owned today. Tour groups walk past it every night. People stop and take photos. Delphine LaLaurie passed away in Paris in 1849. She was never charged, and she was never punished. Her body was reportedly secretly returned to New Orleans and buried in St. Louis Cemetery. This is the only house on this list older than the internet itself, and it's the one that, even today, makes most visitors who research it feel sick. For over 20 years, in a normal-looking 3-story house on a quiet residential street in Gloucester, Fred and Rose West ended the lives of young women. The Wests were a married couple. Fred worked construction. Rose stayed at home. They had a large family of their own. To the outside world, they looked like a slightly rough but harmless British working-class family. Inside the house, between roughly 1967 and 1987, they harmed and ultimately took the lives of at least 12 young women. Some were Fred's own daughters. Many were hitchhikers or vulnerable young women they had lured back to the property. Rose actively participated. Fred sometimes recorded what happened. The remains were broken down in the cellar. Some were buried under the floorboards. Some were buried in the back garden. Their own daughter, Heather, had been taken in 1987 and buried under their patio for years. Fred would joke to his other children that if they misbehaved, they'd end up under the patio like Heather. The children eventually mentioned this joke to a friend at school. The friend told a teacher. The teacher told social services. Social services told the police. In February of 1994, Gloucester police obtained a search warrant for the property. When they showed up with shovels, Rose went pale and screamed for Fred. By the end of the week, they had recovered Heather's remains. By the end of the month, they had recovered 8 more. Fred West confessed to 12 of these crimes, then passed away in 1995, before he could face trial. Rose West was convicted on 10 counts and sentenced to life in prison. She's still alive today. She has applied for parole multiple times. She has been denied every time. She continues to maintain her innocence. In October of 1996, Gloucester City Council made an unusual decision. They didn't just demolish the house, they incinerated every brick, every plank, every fragment of it. Today, where 25 Cromwell Street used to be, there's a public walkway, just grass and pavement, nothing else. A modest brick ranch house in Norwood Park Township, just outside Chicago. 3 bedrooms, 2-car garage. Unremarkable from the street. John Wayne Gacy lived there from 1971 until his arrest in December of 1978. He was, on paper, an upstanding citizen. He owned a successful contracting company called PDM Construction. He was active in local Democratic politics. He had once met First Lady Rosalind Carter. There's even a photo of them shaking hands. He performed at children's parties dressed as Pogo the Clown. In the 7 years he lived in that house, he ended the lives of at least 33 people. Gacy would lure them to the house, sometimes by offering them construction jobs, sometimes by impersonating a police officer. He buried 29 bodies on the property, most of them in the crawl space directly beneath his living room. For years, neighbors complained about a foul smell coming from the house. Gacy told them it was moisture. He told them that rodents had gotten under the foundation. People actually believed him. He was the friendly contractor down the street. Gacy started dumping victims off the I-55 bridge into the Des Plaines River. He was caught in December 1978 because his last victim, a boy named Robert Piest, had a job let through Gacy's company, and Piest's mother told police where her son had gone. Gacy was placed under surveillance, while officers were inside the house on a follow-up visit. The furnace kicked on. One of the cops walked into the bathroom and noticed an overpowering smell. He said it smelled like a morgue. When the police got the warrant and started digging in the crawl space, they kept finding bones. They had to bring in an archaeologist to map the burial sites. Gacy was convicted on 33 counts. He was given the highest possible sentence, and that sentence was carried out in May of 1994. His last words, reportedly, were, "Kiss my ass." The house was demolished in April of 1979, just 4 months after his arrest. The lot stayed empty for years. People would drive past and slow down. In 1986, a new home was built on the property with a different street number, in part to discourage tourists. To this day, neighbors say people still come from out of town just to look at the spot. In 2011, sheriff's investigators secretly exhumed 8 of Gacy's victims, who had never been identified. They were trying to put names to the bones using modern DNA testing. As of today, 5 of those victims still haven't been identified. Most of the people on this list took the lives of others. Ed Gein wasn't technically the most prolific. He's only confirmed to have ended 2 lives. But what he did with them is why he's on this list. Ed Gein lived alone on a farm in rural Plainfield, Wisconsin. After his mother passed in 1945, he sealed off the parts of the house she had lived in and let them fall into decay. He lived in a single small kitchen. The rest of the house, the barn, the sheds, became something else. In November of 1957, police investigating the disappearance of a local hardware store owner named Baroness Warden went to question Gein. They didn't even have a warrant. They were just hoping he had seen something. When they got to the farm and walked into the barn, they found Berenice's body. Then they searched the rest of the property. What they found inside Gein's farmhouse defies most descriptions. He had been visiting local cemeteries for years and digging up the remains of recently deceased women. He brought them home and did horrible things with them. He had been doing this since the late 1940s, for nearly a decade. Gein was declared insane and committed to a psychiatric hospital. He spent the rest of his life there. He passed away in 1984 of cancer. The farmhouse never made it to demolition. In March of 1958, just a few weeks after his arrest, while plans were being made to auction off the property, someone set the house on fire. It burned to the ground. The arsonist was never caught. Most locals believe it was a neighbor who didn't want the house to become a tourist attraction. The car Gein used to transport people was bought at the public auction by a carnival operator, who toured it around the Midwest as a sideshow attraction. You could pay 25 cents to look inside. Gein became one of the most influential figures in the entire horror genre. There's nothing left of the farm, just woods. The road that leads to where the house used to stand has no signs. The house of Joseph Fritzl was a small, 2-story home in a quiet residential street of Amstetten, Austria. It had small windows and a neat garden, identical to thousands of other houses in Central Europe. It looks completely ordinary. Joseph Fritzl lived there with his wife Rosemary and their 7 children. He was an electrical engineer. He owned a few rental properties. The family appeared to outsiders as ordinary, conservative and traditional. Fritzl had been convicted of a violent assault in 1967. but had served less than 2 years and his record had eventually been expunged under Austrian law. In 1984, Fritzl tricked his 18-year-old daughter Elizabeth into the basement of the family home. He told her he needed help moving a door. Once she was inside, he locked the door behind her. He kept her there for the next 24 years. Fritzl had spent years building an elaborate underground complex, a series of tiny rooms connected by narrow passages, hidden behind a concrete wall and a steel door with an electronic combination lock. The ceiling was less than 5.5 feet high. There was a tiny kitchen, a tiny bathroom, and a tiny bedroom. There were no windows, no sunlight, and no way out. Elizabeth lived in that complex for 24 years. Fritzl came down to her every few days. He assaulted her repeatedly. She gave birth 7 times in that basement. One of the babies passed away shortly after birth. Fritzl told nobody and disposed of it. 3 of the surviving children stayed in the basement with their mother. The other 3 were brought upstairs by Fritzl, who told his wife and the local social services that they were foundlings. Abandoned babies left on his doorstep by Elizabeth, who had supposedly run away to join a cult. The lie held for over 2 decades. During that time, more than 100 lodgers rented rooms in the upstairs portion of the house. Some of them later said they had heard strange noises. Fritzl always explained them away. Rosemary Fritzl, the wife, lived in the same house the entire time, just feet above where her own daughter was being held captive. There's no evidence she ever knew. The truth came out in April of 2008. Elizabeth's oldest daughter, Kirsten, who had spent her entire 19 years in the basement, became seriously ill. Fritzl finally agreed to take her to a hospital. While Kirsten was in critical condition, doctors and nurses became suspicious. Her medical condition didn't match anything Fritzl was describing. Police pressured Elizabeth, who was upstairs visiting Kirsten, until she finally broke and told them everything. Fritzl was arrested. The basement was emptied. The remaining children were freed. They had spent their entire lives, some of them 18 years, without ever seeing the sun. Fritzl was convicted in 2009 on a series of extremely serious charges. He was sentenced to life in a secure psychiatric facility, where he remains today. He has occasionally applied for compassionate release, citing dementia. The applications have been denied. The basement was filled with concrete in 2013. The house was sold in 2016 for 160,000 euros. The buyers said they intended to convert it into apartments. We are at the bottom now. There's only one house left. It's not the house with the most victims. It's not the house with the most famous offender. What happened there didn't end in tragedy. Nobody was physically harmed. The case isn't even a violent crime case. It's a stalking case. But out of every house we've talked about, every demolished site, every cursed mansion, every basement dungeon, this is the one the internet keeps coming back to. Years after it ended, it's still the case people argue about. It's the case with the highest BuzzFeed unsolved view count. It's the case that became a Netflix series that pulled 125 million hours of viewing in 5 days. I've thought a lot about why, and I think the reason is simple. Every single one of the houses we just talked about has an ending. Every one of them has a name attached. The person responsible is gone, or in prison, or hiding from a mob in Paris in 1834. The case is closed. The horror is in the past tense. You can read about Gacy and know what happened in 1994. You can read about Fritzl and know he is inside an Australian high-security facility right now. Even Hinterkaifeck, which has been unsolved for 100 years, feels safe because everyone involved has been gone for a century. This last house is different. The stalker was never caught. The investigation went cold. The letters never resumed when the family left. The new owners have never been bothered. And as far as anyone knows, the man, or woman, who wrote those letters is still alive, still lives nearby, and is almost certainly still walking past the house on a regular basis. This is the most disturbed house on the internet. The house sits at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. Bloomberg ranked it the 99th richest town in America. But Westfield has a strange history. The same town is home to the journalist family tragedy house, where in 1971 an accountant calmly took the lives of his wife, his mother, and his 3 children, then disappeared for 18 years. It's home to the childhood house of Charles Addams, the cartoonist who created the Addams family. Right in the middle of all this stood a 1905 Dutch colonial revival home, with 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and 2 porches. Derek and Maria Broaddus bought it in June of 2014 for $1.36 million. Derek was a senior vice president at an insurance firm in Manhattan. Maria had grown up in Westfield. They had 3 children, ages 5, 8 and 10, 2 daughters and a son. They were excited. The house was their dream. 3 days after closing, Derek went to check the mail. Inside was a thick, white, card-shaped envelope, heavy, clunky handwriting on the front. The new owner. He opened it. The letter started friendly. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard. Allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. The second sentence was different. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within? The writer claimed his family had been watching 657 Boulevard for generations. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched it in the 1960s. It is now my time. He wanted to know if Derek and Maria knew the history of the house. He wanted to know what was inside the walls. He wrote, I will find out. And then he mentioned the children. You have children. I have seen them. So far I think there are 3 that I have counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for the growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names I will call to them and draw them to me. The letter ended with a question. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out of any of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. It was signed in cursive at the bottom. The Watcher. Derek finished reading. Then, before doing anything else, he walked through the house and turned off every single light. He didn't want anyone outside to be able to see him. He stood there in the dark for a few minutes. He had just bought his dream home, and he was about to learn that someone had been watching it for longer than he'd been alive. The Westfield police told him not to tell anyone. Every neighbor was now a suspect. 2 weeks later, the second letter came. The Watcher knew about the renovations. He knew about the dumpster outside the house. He knew the children's nicknames. He knew their birth order. He referenced the easel that one of the daughters had been using on the back porch. An easel that was not visible from the street. The only way to see it was from one of the houses directly behind, or directly next door. Will the young blood play in the basement? The letter asked. Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs you would never hear them scream. The third letter came a few weeks later. It was shorter. Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you. The Watcher was angry that the family hadn't moved in. The investigation that followed was the most exhaustive private investigation any family has ever conducted into a stalker. The Broaddus's hired a private investigator. They hired Kroll, one of the most expensive corporate security firms in the world. They had handwriting analysts compare every letter. They reached out to a real-life FBI agent who had inspired the Clarice Starling character in The Silence of the Lambs. Derek had a personal connection to her through a school board. She agreed to look at the case. She profiled the writer as someone in their 50s or 60s. Who lived nearby. They hired a forensic linguist named Robert Leonard, who had become one of the most respected forensic linguists in the country. He combed online forums for matching writing patterns. He found nothing definitive. They tested the DNA on one of the envelopes. It came back female. That ruled out their main suspect, a neighbor named Michael Langford, who had schizophrenia and lived directly next door, in a house his family had owned since the 1960s. The Watcher's letters had referenced the father watching in the 1960s, which lined up perfectly. Michael's father had passed away about 12 years earlier, and the Watcher claimed to have been on the job for the better part of 2 decades. It all fit, until the DNA didn't. The police tested Michael's sister Abby, a real estate agent, because she might have been bitter about losing the commission on the house. Her DNA didn't match either. The investigation into the Langford family quietly stopped. The Broadduses were never told why. There was another suspect. One night, while the police had the house under surveillance, a car pulled up to 657 Boulevard around 11 p.m. and just sat there for an unusually long time. Officers approached. Inside was a young woman. They asked her what she was doing on the street. She said her boyfriend lived nearby. And then she said something the officers weren't expecting. She said her boyfriend was into dark video games, really dark. And that in one of them, his character's name was The Watcher. The police asked to interview him. He agreed. He never showed up. He still lives somewhere on that block. Police never publicly identified him. They had no probable cause to compel him. As far as anyone knows, he's never spoken about the case. The fourth letter arrived in 2017. By that point, the Broadduses had been trying to sell the house for 3 years. The bids kept coming in low. They tried to demolish the house and split the lot. The planning board rejected it after public outcry. They rented it out instead. The new tenants got the next letter. The tone had completely changed. The watcher was furious. He addressed the letter to the vile and spiteful Derek and his wench of a wife Maria. He called the planning board his soldiers of the boulevard. And then he wrote, "All hail the watcher. Maybe a car accident. Maybe a fire. Maybe something as simple as a mild illness that never seems to go away but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious passing of a pet. Loved ones suddenly leave us. Planes and cars and bicycles crash. Bones break. You are despised by the house." And the watcher won. That was the last letter. A journalist named Reese Wiedemann found the broadest lawsuit against the previous owners. He wrote the whole story for New York Magazine. The article went viral. BuzzFeed Unsolved made an episode that has now been viewed over 15 million times. The case became a Netflix series in 2022 that pulled 125 million hours of viewing in its first 5 days. The Broadduses sold the house in 2019 for $959,000, a loss of nearly $500,000. They left a letter for the new owners, Andrew and Allison Carr, with their real estate attorney. It read, "We wish you nothing except the calm and tranquility we once imagined in this house." They included a photocopy of the watcher's handwriting, so the Carrs would know what to look for if they ever received one. Here's what makes 657 Boulevard the most disturbed house on the internet. It's not the worst house. There are houses with victims in them. Houses where unspeakable things were done, but every one of them has an ending. The person responsible is caught, or gone, or imprisoned. The case is closed. 657 Boulevard is open. The watcher was never identified, never arrested and never charged, never even publicly named as a suspect. The Westfield Watcher is the only true crime case where the audience ends up in the same position as the victims. And the more attention this case gets, the more articles, the more videos, the more Netflix series, the more we are watching the house. Exactly like he wanted. The watcher said his job was watching, his life, his obsession. He never said he was the only one. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And if you want more, you can follow me on Spotify. The link is down in the description.